All right, let's talk about hardware needs for MIDI. There's a couple different ways to look at this. Really, the hardware needs for recording MIDI can be zero, can be nothing, because we can just click in MIDI, right? Because it's just that data, it's just on-off messages. So if I just make a MIDI clip here by double clicking, then I go to my MIDI grid and just click in some notes, I can do that. Now you might be thinking, hey, why are we hearing it? We're hearing it because if I go over to my instruments tab here, I left that instrument on it, right? So it already has an instrument on it. So that's what we're hearing. We can change it, and that's just fine. So we can just click in notes. We don't need any extra hardware to do MIDI recording. However, you can have some. So it's sometimes good to have a nice little keyboard. There are millions of different kinds of keyboards you can get, but what you want to look for is you want a MIDI keyboard. Okay, so here's an example of one. This is just a little like 2-octave keyboard. This is an old one I have. This is a Oxygen 8. These are actually really old at this point. But what you're looking for is that it has some kind of data output, like USB. Okay, USB is the most common. So this has a USB output. So that means I can plug it directly into my computer and I don't need any other kind of interface or anything. Okay? Anything modern that you buy should have a USB output. Okay? Now, these are fairly inexpensive. They're plastic keys, and they don't have any sounds in them. They're just going to record the MIDI notes, and then you're going to apply sound to them later. Now you might have a bigger keyboard that has sounds built in. Okay, if it makes sound on its own, that would be called a synthesizer. Synthesizer is something that's going to be making sounds on its own. That you could either plug in to your audio interface as an audio instrument if you want to record the sounds in it. But if you don't want to record the sounds in it and you just want to use it as a MIDI controller, okay, so something that lets you play in MIDI notes, then you would record it, you would plug it in as MIDI. So if it has a USB out or anything like that, that's the way to go. If it doesn't have a USB out, it might have a MIDI out. Now a MIDI out is an older way to connect these keyboards and things to a computer. It'll look like a circle with 5 pins. Okay, so here's an image of one. If it has an output that looks like that, then you need 2 things. You need a MIDI cable, okay, which looks exactly like how you would imagine. It's got that 5-pin connection on both sides. And then you need a box that will convert that to a USB signal. Now, you can get a separate box to do that. However, you might already have one because a lot of audio interfaces have a MIDI port in them. Here's the audio interface I showed you a minute ago. If I flip to the back, it actually does have 2 MIDI inputs. Or sorry, 1 MIDI input and 1 MIDI output. Okay? It's unlikely that you're going to need a MIDI output. That would be for like if you wanted to send information from your computer back to the keyboard to control the sounds in it, which you can do, but most of the time we don't need to do that. So this can serve as my MIDI interface as well as my audio interface. Okay? Again, if your keyboard has a USB output, you don't need a MIDI interface. And any new MIDI controller is going to have a USB output. Okay? So only in the case of having a fairly old MIDI controller are you going to need to use that 5-pin MIDI cable. So in most cases, you can get yourself a nice MIDI keyboard for not very expensive and plug it directly into your computer with USB.